Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to West LA Authors Club, sponsored by West Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. My name is Elham Abian, and it's a great honor for me to be here to introduce our distinguished guest today. One of the West Los Angeles Chamber's mission is to appreciate, illustrate, and illuminate the intellectual, cultural, and literary parts of our society as a component of social activity by shedding light on those corners of our environment which not intentionally but unfairly underrepresented with the other values we are trying to take care of. In this program, on a monthly basis, the writers, thinkers, and literary activists of our community will be introduced and appreciated by our members. Our honored guest of tonight is Mr. Bob Zeidman. He is the president and founder of high-tech company Software Analysis and Forensic Engineering Corporation, Zeidman Consulting, and Zeidman Technologies. He has designed software and hardware for clients including Apple Computer, Cisco System, Ricoh, and Stanford University. Mr. Zeidman is the author of 4 books on electronic and computer chip design. He is also an inventor with numerous patents and is a parallel entrepreneur, having founded more than 10 companies. He is the designer of the Sam Anna luxury belt wallet, but he may be best known as the inventor of the Silicon Valley napkin that includes everything you need to start your business on the back of the napkin, which is displayed at the Computer History Museum. He also wrote 3 award-winning novels and 3 award-winning screenplays. He earned an Opus Magnum Discovery Award from the Hollywood Film Festival for his novel Honor Flick. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Zeidman.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, and I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for putting on this event, and the library, thanking Elham for the introduction, the nice introduction, especially about the Silicon Valley napkin, which shows a little bit about perseverance. I created that in 1984, and the Computer History Museum, which I am very involved with, rediscovered it just maybe 5 years ago. But they didn't know it was connected to me. They put it on display with a plaque that had some information on it, and it was wrong information. And I went to them and I said, I can correct this because I invented this. And anyway, it shows that, and they're selling it actually at the store at the Computer History Museum. So after all those years, kind of interesting that happened. I'd also like to thank Rusba for inviting me. It's an honor to be a friend of his. I'm sure most of you know that he's a very courageous man who's done some really great things, and I'm proud to say he's a friend of mine. So I thought we can go wherever this, wherever you want this to go. I thought that I'd start off by just talking about my writing. What got me into writing? Because we're here at the library, so I thought that was appropriate. So I started writing, the first time I remember writing at least a novel, I was 13. And I remember sitting in my room and day after day, writing these handwritten, doing everything handwritten. I got up to like 70-some pages of handwritten text. And I don't remember how long I spent on it, but one day I decided to go back and read it from start to finish. It wasn't complete, but I wasn't sure what to do, so I read it, and it was really boring. So I said, I'm not cut out to be a novelist, and I threw it away, and I don't know what happened to it. But I gave it up for years. And then, I guess about maybe 20 years ago, my wife, Carrie, was here, and our son, we'd go up to Santa Rosa from the Bay Area to visit some relatives, and on the way back, our son was always tired and restless, and it's like a 2.5-hour drive. So I would tell him these stories. I just make up stories. And one time I made up a story about a young boy that collected things, and he met this mad scientist, and they went off to Pluto, and he really liked it. And I thought, well, I'll write it up. So I wrote it up into a novel and later a screenplay. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that was my first attempt. You know, we've got the copy here. It's very thin. It's kind of a young adult novel. It was easy to start that way because you could think of everything from beginning to end because it just wasn't that long. And it was something I'd already crafted, you know, on the car ride home, so I knew what was going to happen, you know, from beginning to end. But then later on, I decided that I wanted to take another shot at a novel, so I guess maybe about 15 years ago, I think it was, that, well, probably maybe a little longer than that. I decided I wanted to take another shot. I was doing engineering consulting. I had some free, well, not free time, but I could afford to take time off. And I thought that I'll try a novel. Well, what should it be? And I had this short story. I used to, still in my spare time, I used to write short stories. If I had a good idea, I'd write them down. So I had this story about this movie reel, a videotape that this young couple were watching, and the videotape actually attacked them and strangled them, and that was the end. I don't know if this. Yes. And I have to admit that I think I'm okay from an intellectual property and copyright point of view if I admit this, but there was a National Lampoon short film that I had seen once about, that was similar. He was, this young man gets a letter, he's a filmmaker. I kind of dabbled in filmmaking when I was younger. And so I remember this because this filmmaker, he gets a letter from the studio, he goes into the studio, it turns out it's, you know, a little office in some complex, and the door's open and he walks in, and there's a film on a reel there, and eventually the film is this like stop motion animation, and it attacks him and kills him. And it was funny, maybe it doesn't sound that funny, but it was funny. And so that left an impression, so I did something similar, but I never liked it that much, and I wasn't sure why. I mean, I liked what I had, but I realized that it wasn't complete. It's like, you know, this couple watch a movie and then they die, and it doesn't seem like a very satisfying story. So when I was thinking about novels, I thought, well, what can I do? You know, I started looking at my old stuff, these old stories I wrote for inspiration, and I realized that this would be a great introductory chapter for a novel about a film that kills people. And so I created Horror Flick, which is also over there. And I think Horror Flick is one of the most fun things I did. It's basically about a movie that, the way it's, if you read the blurb on it, it's this movie that's so bad people die watching it. And I took all these old horror movies that I liked watching. I mean, they're really, really bad ones. Plan 9 from Outer Space, if you're familiar with that. Considered the worst movie of all time. The Attack of the Crab Monster, Robot Monster. You know, I actually did research on this. I went out and got these old movies and sat through them. And took all the characters in them. So I had a really good time with it. It was just for fun. There was no meaning to it, no deep meaning. But one thing that did happen is I got a scholarship to the Vermont Studio Center, a 1-month scholarship, full-paid scholarship. You know, you apply, you send them some of your writing. They also took in artists, and then they give you a month. And I got into that, so I took a month off, went to Vermont, and I remember the first 3 days I was there, I sat there with writer's block and couldn't figure out what to do. And I got kind of nervous because I was going to be there for a month, and I thought, wow, if I just sit and stare out the window for a month, this is a big waste of time. But then I pulled out Horror Flick, and I thought, you know, there's some chapters in here that I just didn't like, but I had written them. In fact, that's one of my philosophies about writing, is that when I did Horror Flick, when I sat down to do it, I outlined everything, so I knew exactly what was happening from beginning to end. Kind of an engineering approach. I'm an engineer. And I would, then each day that I worked on it, the task was not to get from beginning to end. In fact, I think that was the problem with that handwritten novel that I did when I was 13. I just didn't know where it was going. I had no vision of where it was supposed to go, so every day I'd have the characters do stuff, and you know, these characters would just wander around, eat breakfast, say hello to each other. I mean, it just, nothing happened. So with Horror Flick, I created this outline, and I knew that I wanted to get from point A to point B, and each day I didn't have to get from the beginning of the novel to the end of the novel. I had to get from the beginning of the current chapter to the end of the chapter. And I knew that, okay, in this chapter, I have to introduce this character. And I knew that in this chapter, this other character had to die off. And so I did that. But then when I got to the Vermont Studio Center, I realized that there were just some chapters I didn't like. So part of my philosophy is, when I was writing it, it was a 9-to-5 job. And every day, I had to sit in front of the computer for 9 to 5 and write something. And usually the goal was to finish a page or 2 pages. Even if I didn't like it, I would do it. And eventually I figured I'd come back to it. When I went to the Vermont Studio Center, that's when I decided I'll come back to it. There's certain chapters I didn't like. I just tore them out. But I knew that by tearing them out, I still had to get from point A to point B, but I could do it completely differently. You know, if this character has to die, I could do it completely differently. If this character has to be introduced, I could create a whole different scenario to introduce that character. So in that month at the Vermont Studio Center, I took out the stuff I didn't like, rewrote it from scratch. The other students there didn't really like my novel, but that's okay. That was a whole other thing. They tended to be more literary writers. They wanted deep meaning to everything. But actually, they liked my short stories, because the short stories, you kind of grasp everything in one reading. I could get up and just read my short story, and they'd say, oh yeah, that's really, I mean, I had these really, what I think were pretty cool ideas, and they liked it. But the novel, you know, this is just meaningless, kind of fun about these old movies, and it doesn't talk about life. And, you know, whereas some of them were really good writers, but some of them I thought wrote like when I was 13. It's kind of like characters who they woke up, they ate breakfast. Actually, as an aside, one guy who was a great writer, and every sentence was really interesting, but his characters didn't do anything. And he said, oh, I'm going to write about a family where one person's starting a business, and you know about starting businesses, so, you know, can you give me some advice? And I said, I got excited, and I said to him, yeah, well, you know, starting a business, you have to raise funds. That can be really stressful. You hire people who don't work out. You know, if you're going to write something, maybe exaggerate. Maybe they hire someone who turns out to have a criminal record, and you know, he starts threatening somebody, and then have to fire him, and then you know, I created all these scenarios, and then they're running out of money. And he listened to me, and then afterwards, the story is more like, guy starts a business, he doesn't have enough money, he's worried about it, his wife's worried, then he gets more money, he gets a loan from the bank. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, yeah. I actually said, again, I think he was a really good writer. I just wish he had done more stuff. That's my opinion. But I think I told him one time. He was a really good guy. I said, you know, my life is more exciting than your novel, so I'm not sure why I want to read your novel. But the point is, I was really happy with my novel. Not everybody liked it. In fact, they brought in 2 published authors to give us advice. And one author was from, I think, University of Michigan, a professor there, and really nice guy, and he gave me good advice. And basically he said, this is not what I would write. But if I were to write it, here's what I would do. And his advice was really good, because he knew, you know, if you're going to make a bestseller or something exciting, you know, here's what you had to add to it. The other writer was a guy who, you know, and I don't want to, you know, maybe I shouldn't make these kind of assumptions, but when he wrote about different issues that I thought, you know, I kind of have my politics, as you'll find out from my latest novel, are conservative. And just reading what this guy wrote, I thought he was kind of liberal, and then I thought, you know, he and I probably are not going to hit it off. And he came, and he was great. It turns out he grew up in Philadelphia, where I grew up. He told you what he thought, and not everybody there was happy with that. But I thought it was refreshing. I mean, if he didn't like it, his language was pretty salty. We had a group discussion where this one woman, you know, like I wouldn't have done this, but we had this group discussion where this one woman said to him, I've been working on my novel for 5 years now, and I can't seem to get it right. I'd like your advice. And I'm going to censor it a little bit, but he said, I would throw it the F away. And she got really upset, and she went and complained that he was sexist because she was a woman and he didn't like, he was African American, by the way. I don't know how that related to anything, but, you know, but I loved it because look, I know sometimes people need to tell me that, and they won't tell me that. You know, what you're doing here is just not working. It's bad. You know, don't think it's great stuff. Work on something else. And what he said to her is, you know, he said you should start something new, because if you can't figure it out in 5 years, you shouldn't be doing it anymore. Do something else. Your next one could be great. But she didn't really hear the rest of that. But I liked him. He and I, we actually got into trouble. This is another kind of side thing. But there was an off-campus party. It was like this community was a campus, and somehow somebody found out, somebody down the street was having a party, and I got invited to it, and I went, and this guy was there. I should think of his name. And by the way, he was an award-winning writer. He won all these awards, like I don't say because I don't remember which ones exactly, but you know, pretty prestigious awards. And there was an artist there. They also had these artists, and they had a professor from the University of Pennsylvania, so we all had this Philadelphia connection. And this artist was a really nice guy, but he did black boxes with lines through them. That was his art. Everything was a different, you know, you make a bigger black box, a little black river line, and the line was sometimes diagonal, and sometimes horizontal. I didn't get it. But the three of us were at this party, and we were drinking beer. I had like 2 beers, and we're just talking about Philadelphia and stuff. And, so it turns out I got along well with this writer, and he gave me good advice. I knew that if he didn't like what I was doing, he'd say, throw it the F out. So if he said he liked it, or here's how to improve it, I listened carefully. We got in trouble because the next day, the founder of the Vermont Studio Center was at breakfast with this writer. And when I walked in to the cafeteria, the founder turned to me and said, you know, we don't approve of using chemical enhancements to generate creativity. We think that it should come naturally. I'm thinking, and by the way, anyone who knows me knows beer and wine are probably the extent. And even nowadays, I do very little. Back then, it was you know, maybe on the weekends once in a while. But I realized he was talking about I had 2 beers, and he was upset to learn that I'd been. And by the way, you walk back. We were 2 blocks away. You walk to the party, walk back. Kind of interesting in an artist community, they'd be upset that I had a couple of beers, but I think I had to promise I would not drink for the remainder of the month I was there. But so that was an interesting, kind of a lot of asides there. But it was an interesting experience, and I liked being with all these writers. Some of the writers were really fantastic writers. They could craft they could create these visuals, craft these sentences that were really terrific. They give you a great idea of where you were or what a person was like. I think most of them had a hard time doing a novel. They did great short stories. And again, I think my secret to doing a novel is really take an engineering approach, go from beginning to end, you know, figure out what you're going to do in each chapter. And I'll tell you one thing about that when I get to my latest novel, which is Good Intentions, because it took an interesting turn that my method worked, but something interesting happened. I'll get to it in a minute. But with Horror Flick, after I went to the Vermont Studio Center, I was very happy with it. I submitted it to some competitions. The Hollywood Film Festival gave it the Opus Magnum Discovery Award, and so my wife and I went down to Hollywood. Well, came down here to Hollywood. We went to the Beverly Hilton Hotel. They had this big event where they gave out awards to movie makers, independent filmmakers. We went twice because we went the next year, so I forget who was there each year. But Harrison Ford, Nicole Kidman, Penny Marshall, who by the way seemed like she was not completely there the whole time. They all came up and gave speeches. Hers didn't make any sense, but Cameron Diaz, Sandra Bullock. These were all people there. Patrick Swayze, who stayed around afterwards. A lot of them did their thing and left. Jack Lemmon was there.
Nicole Kidman?
Yeah, Nicole Kidman. My wife likes to remind me that she met Nicole Kidman in the bathroom and they complimented each other on their dresses. And so the thing is, I thought this is it. All the producers are saying that we're looking for good material. We can never find good material. And I went up to them and I said, I want an award. Here's your good material. But then my wife went back to the Bay Area, and I stayed for a week, and nobody would return my phone calls. So pretty much the beginning and